The last days of Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire, once a powerful state, had become a shadow of its former self by the 15th century. Only memories remained of the former greatness of Rome, which Constantine the Great had transferred to a new city on the shores of the Bosphorus. The giant walls, domes of temples, palaces, and markets of Constantinople were reminders of 1,000 years of history, but the empire itself had become a tiny state surrounded by enemies. By the middle of the 15th century, the emperor's power extended only to the city of Constantinople itself, a few fortresses in the vicinity, and scattered islands. Even the Peloponnese, where Byzantine governors still held sway, was gradually coming under threat. Nevertheless, Constantinople remained a symbol. For the East, it was a city of wealth and strategic importance. For the West, it was a sacred stronghold of Christianity. Its walls, built under Emperor Theodosius in the 5th century, were considered impenetrable. Enemies approached these walls many times, but always retreated. Even the fearsome hordes of Arabs and Bulgarians could not break this bastion. But in the 15th century, a new enemy arose against Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire. Its army, discipline, and resources far surpassed anything the Byzantines could muster. The young Sultan Mehmed II, who ascended the throne in 1451, immediately declared, "I want to conquer the city that will become the capital of the world." Mehmed was not just a conqueror. He was an educated, energetic, and ambitious ruler. He spoke several languages and was interested in science, but at the same time, he had an iron will and was ruthless. From childhood, he was taught that the main goal of the Sultan should be to take Constantinople. The old sultans had tried but failed. Mehmed decided to see it through to the end. He understood that the conquest of Constantinople would give the Ottoman Empire not only strategic control over the Straits, but also symbolic status, power over the Second Rome. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos turned out to be the last ruler of Byzantium. His life was not easy. He grew up in conditions of decline and saw the empire lose cities and lands. But he was steadfast and noble. When fate put him on the throne, he understood that his reign could be the last. The emperor tried to find allies. He appealed to the Pope, the Venetians, and the Genoese. But Europe was preoccupied with its own wars. France and England had exhausted their strength in the 100 Years' War, Italy was fragmented, and the Germans and Hungarians feared their own neighbors. The help they promised turned out to be pretty much nothing. By 1452, it was clear that the decisive blow was near. Mehmed began preparations. On the banks of the Bosphorus, he ordered the construction of the huge Rumeli Hisar fortress, directly opposite the old Byzantine fortress. Now the strait was blocked. Any ship sailing to Constantinople came under fire from Turkish cannons. The townspeople watched with alarm as the enemy fortified their position and erected new towers before their very eyes. But they had no power to prevent it. New technologies were of particular importance. The Hungarian master Urban, who had once offered his services to the Byzantines but was rejected due to the poverty of the treasury, turned to the Sultan. He proposed to create cannons of unprecedented size, capable of destroying even the most powerful walls. Mehmed agreed. Work began in Adrianople, and soon bombards appeared, with cannonballs weighing hundreds of kilograms. Dozens of oxen were needed to transport them. In Constantinople, they understood that they had never seen such weapons before. Their belief in the impregnability of the walls began to crack. In the spring of 1453, the Ottoman army marched on the city. Contemporaries wrote of 100,000 to 150,000 soldiers, although historians dispute the numbers. But even if the army was smaller, its power was impressive. Janissaries, elite infantry, Sipahis, cavalry, artillery, and a huge supply train. The Sultan personally led the campaign. Opposing them in Constantinople were about 7,000 defenders. Half of them were city residents, monks, and ordinary citizens. The rest were allies. The Genoese commander Giustiniani Longo played a special role. He arrived with a detachment of experienced soldiers and took charge of defending the most dangerous sections of the wall. His presence inspired hope. The soldiers knew that he was experienced and brave. In April, Mehmed's army surrounded the city. The siege began, which became the last act of the 1,000-year-old empire. Every day, cannons roared. Cannonballs shook the earth, smashed into the stone, and left gaps. The Byzantines rushed to plug them with sacks of earth, logs, and anything else they could find. At night, women and children carried stones while the men stood guard with their weapons. The Turks tried to destroy the walls with tunnels. In response, the defenders listened to the ground, trying to catch the sound of the diggers, and counterattacked underground. Battles even took place in the tunnels. A huge chain blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn Bay. It kept Turkish ships out. But Mehmed found a solution. He ordered the ships to be dragged overland. The Turks built a road out of logs greased with fat along the slopes of the hills. And overnight, dozens of ships ended up in the Golden Horn. The townspeople woke up and saw masts where they shouldn't have been. The shock was indescribable. Nevertheless, Constantinople continued to hold out. May was approaching, and everyone understood that the decisive battle was near. Each new day of the siege was a trial for Constantinople. From morning till night, the walls shook from the blows of Urban's cannons. Huge cannonballs, forged from stone, flew through the air with a howl and crashed into the masonry. Sometimes they flew over the walls and fell into residential areas. Then entire houses collapsed, and screams could be heard in the streets. People bury the dead right in their gardens and courtyards, with no time for rituals. The city gradually got used to this rumbling. It seemed as if the earth itself was singing with an iron voice. But every night, soldiers and townspeople rose to the walls. Women carried stones, teenagers dragged bags of earth. Monks came out of their monasteries and prayed, then took up pickaxes and shovels. Byzantium lived on its last reserves of strength, as if every man had become a soldier. At the same time, disputes were growing in the city. Emperor Constantine XI, although he remained firm, faced distrust from some of the nobility. Some said it was better to surrender to the Sultan and save their lives. Others pointed to the miracles of the past, reminding them that Constantinople had withstood worse sieges. In the city's neighborhoods, prophecies were whispered that the fall of the city would mark the end of the world, and that the emperor was the last of the Palaiologos dynasty. Rumors were interspersed with hope. One vision was particularly powerful. A glowing angel had reappeared in Hagia Sophia, promising that the city walls would not fall as long as faith remained. People flocked to churches, bringing candles and praying. Meanwhile, Mehmed too increased the pressure. He understood that time was against him. The protracted siege was undermining the Sultan's authority. Therefore, he tried to attack by all means. First, the Turks resorted to tunneling. Sappers dug passages under the walls and laid explosive mixtures, resin, sulfur, and tinder. Several times the ground beneath the walls shook from explosions, and stone blocks flew out of the masonry. But the defenders found the tunnels. Some heard rustling sounds underground, others noticed empty spaces. The Byzantines and Genoese broke into these passages, and there, in the darkness, hand-to-hand combat began by torchlight. Turkish and Byzantine warriors died underground, burying each other with earth and stones. Then the Sultan ordered a naval diversion. His ships tried to break through into the bay, ramming the chain. But the Byzantines' flames, remnants of the famous Greek fire, forced them to retreat. Although the secret of the ancient weapon had been almost lost, a few jugs of the flammable mixture had survived. When the flames spread across the water, the Turks retreated in horror, losing their ships. But Mehmed did not give up. Then he decided on a bold move, to drag the fleet across land. This operation shocked even his soldiers. The Turks laid wooden logs on the slopes of the hills near Galata and coated them with animal fat and oil. Overnight, dozens of ships were dragged across the land, past the walls, and launched directly into the Golden Horn. At dawn, the Byzantines woke up and saw something incredible. Where yesterday there had been no masts, now there were dozens of ships. Ottoman galleys appeared in the bay, behind the chain that had been considered impassable. The city trembled with despair. Life in besieged Constantinople was becoming increasingly difficult. Food supplies were running out. Fishermen could no longer go out into the bay, and the mills were not working. People ate dried beans, leftover grain, and even ground bones to somehow satisfy their hunger. At the same time, order was maintained. The emperor walked the streets without guards, talking to the townspeople and encouraging them. "We are all citizens of one city, and together we will defend it," he said. His image strengthened morale. Even those who had doubts began to believe that as long as the emperor remained with them, the city would stand. Giustiniani Longo played a special role. The Genoese commander not only led the troops, but also went out onto the wall himself under cannonballs and arrows. His armor shone, and people said, "As long as he is alive, the walls will not fall." He organized the repair of breaches, built additional barricades, and instructed young warriors. The Turks suffered losses. Every day, dozens or even hundreds of Ottoman soldiers died at the walls. But there were too many of them, and their ranks were quickly replenished. For the Byzantines, however, every loss was irreparable. The Sultan understood that the siege could not be prolonged. He reinforced the artillery and ordered it to fire without interruption. The roar of the cannons did not subside day or night. Stone cannonballs demolished towers and destroyed neighborhoods. The city was turning into ruins. And yet the walls remained standing. By the end of May, it was clear that the decisive moment was near. The Byzantines were expecting a general assault. People prepared as best they could, services were held continuously in churches, monks and women wove bandages for soldiers, and children carried water and stones to the walls. It seemed as if the entire city had turned into one huge camp. Hope for a miracle did not fade. People said that Europe would send help after all, that the Venetian or Genoese fleet was about to appear on the horizon. Every day, the inhabitants scanned the sea, looking for sails. But the sea remained empty. Meanwhile, Mehmed was preparing a decisive attack. He ordered all the commanders to gather and announced, "The city will fall, and whoever enters it first will receive eternal glory." The Ottoman army was preparing for the final blow. May 28, 1453. An uneasy silence reigned in the city. After weeks of continuous fighting, shelling, and attacks, the soldiers and residents realized that the decisive battle was inevitable. Rumors of an impending assault spread quickly. People flocked to churches. That evening, the last liturgy was held in Hagia Sophia. The huge temple, where emperors had been crowned for centuries, was overflowing. Everyone gathered here, nobles, simple craftsmen, women with children, monks, soldiers. Never before had there been so many people in the temple. Prayers merged into a single hum, hundreds of candles burned, and it seemed that the light in the temple had a life of its own. Emperor Constantine XI entered the temple and approached the altar. His gaze was tired but determined. He confessed, took communion, and addressed the people. "My brothers, this city is our common heritage, our home, and our destiny. Today, each of us becomes its defender. We will stand together as long as we breathe. I will not leave you." These words echoed throughout the temple. People cried, hugged each other, and said goodbye. Many understood that this was their last night. When the liturgy ended, the emperor went to the walls. He walked along the bastions, spoke to the soldiers, and thanked each of them for their service. The soldiers, many of whom were exhausted and wounded, were encouraged by his presence. Even the most desperate believed that with such an emperor they could not retreat. The last night. The night was quiet. The moon lit up the walls, the sea, and the Turkish camp, where drums and prayers could already be heard. The Byzantines knew that the assault would begin in the morning. Many did not go to sleep. Services were held in churches, people gathered their last supplies in their homes, and mothers hugged their children. Preparations were in full swing in the Turkish camp. Mehmed II personally inspected the troops, promising rich spoils and rewards. The soldiers knew that their fate would be decided tomorrow. The general assault. At dawn on May 29, the Turkish army moved on the walls. First, crowds of mercenaries and allies went into battle. They were thrown in first to wear down the defenders. The Byzantines and Genoese fought back fiercely. Arrows, spears, stones, boiling tar, everything flew from the walls. The first wave was repelled, but new ones followed. Now the regular Turkish infantry was advancing. Cannonballs crashed into the walls, creating breaches. Where the stones fell, the Byzantines erected barricades of wood, earth, and the bodies of the dead. The battle became continuous. Finally, the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite, entered the fray. Their formation was tight and disciplined. To the sound of drums and cries of prayer, they moved toward the breaches. Justinian Longo stood at the main defensive position. The Genoese commander defended with incredible fortitude. But in the heat of battle, he was seriously wounded, according to some accounts, by a cannonball, according to others, by an arrow to the chest. He was carried away from the battlefield. The Byzantine soldiers, seeing their leader leave the walls, felt despair. Their fighting spirit began to wane. Emperor Constantine XI found himself in the thick of the battle. He took off his purple regalia so as not to stand out and rushed into the attack with a sword in his hands. He was last seen at the gates of St. Romanus. There he fought side by side with his men until the Turkish troops broke through the breach. His cry, "The city has fallen, but I am still alive," remains in memory. After that, he was seen in the final battle, surrounded by enemies. The emperor's body was never found, only later did the Turks claim to have found it among the many fallen. The fall. Soon the walls were finally breached. The Janissaries stormed into the city. First they captured the gates, then opened them, and tens of thousands of soldiers poured in. A massacre began in the streets. Soldiers killed, looted, and took prisoners. The townspeople fled to the temples, hoping to find protection there. Thousands of people filled Hagia Sophia. But when the Janissaries broke into the temple, all hope was lost. People were taken into slavery, sacred objects were looted, and the altar was desecrated. By noon, the resistance was broken. The Sultan's green banners rose above the city. Constantinople had fallen. Mehmed's triumph. Mehmed II rode into the city on horseback. He ordered an end to the slaughter and looting, although the destruction was already enormous. Approaching Hagia Sophia, he climbed onto the pulpit and said a prayer. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Thus, the main church of Byzantium became a mosque. The Sultan ordered the fallen to be buried and the walls to be preserved. He understood that Constantinople was now his capital. The city was renamed Istanbul and became the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Consequences. News of the fall of Constantinople spread throughout Europe. For Christians, it was a shock. The empire that was considered the heir to Rome had fallen. People wept in Venice and Genoa, and the Pope declared mourning in Rome. But help came too late. The fall of Byzantium was a turning point. Trade routes to the east came under Ottoman control. This prompted Europeans to seek new routes around Africa and across the Atlantic. Soon, Columbus would discover the New World, and Vasco da Gama would reach India. In a sense, the fall of Byzantium marked the beginning of a new era, the Age of Discovery. For Muslims, it was a triumph. The Ottomans gained a world-class capital, which became the heart of their empire for centuries. Epilogue. Thus ended the history of an empire that had lasted for more than 1,000 years. From Constantine the Great to Constantine Palaiologos, there was a long line of rulers who held the Eastern Roman Empire. But everything has an end. Constantine XI is remembered as the last emperor to die on the walls of his city. His image has become a symbol of courage and devotion. In folk legends, he was called the sleeping king who would return when the time came. And the city itself, now known as Istanbul, still bears traces of its past. Within its walls, in the domes of Hagia Sophia, in the narrow streets, you can hear the echoes of that last battle, the battle that ended the 1,000-year history of the Byzantine Empire.